Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of The Resilient Show. I just got a comment on my on the page that says, I always say that I'm so excited for this next guest. And I guess I do say it because I'm always excited for this next guest. And so today we have Richie McGinniss on. Richie and I have been friends for a while, as I was a guest on the Daily Caller several times and got to go on Tucker's show. And Richie worked over, kind of led the Daily Caller and some of the work there and worked for Tucker Carlson. And so that's how we first met. And if you don't know who Richie is, you're going to be well informed in this episode. We've got a lot of fun sharing some of his crazy stories and just some of the really cool stuff he's done in journalism. Before we get started, I want to read your bio, Richie, for everyone to get a kind of glimpse of the life of Richie McGinniss. And by the way, we didn't match on purpose.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, and I'm very proud. You said you wore that shirt for your wedding.
Yeah.
And this show.
Yep.
So we're honored.
two best days of my life.
Yes, exactly. All right. Today on The Resilient Show, we have Richie McGinniss, a journalist, video director, and a guy who's been on the front line of some of the most defining moments in recent American history. Richie graduated from Georgetown University with a degree in Middle Eastern history, minoring in Arabic and philosophy. He's worked across major media outlets from an early start at Al Jazeera Arabic and MSNBC to later producing Levine TV with Mark Levine. He then took a leadership role under Tucker Carlson at the Daily Caller, where he built and ran their video operation. Under his leadership, the outlet became a go-to resource for the on-the-ground reporting during the 2020 riots, the January 6th Capitol unrest, and beyond. His first-hand reporting put him in the middle of it all, whether it was the CHAZ occupation in Seattle, riots in Kenosha, or election turmoil in D.C. He even became a key witness and named victim in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Richie is also the author of Riot Diet, a deep dive into the chaos he's covered. When he's not reporting, he's either battling the waves as a semi-non-professional small wave surfer or scrapping in men's league hockey, which he recently just battled it out with our FBI director, Cash.
We blew a 3-goal lead against the FBI director. It's devastating.
Yep. Did you give a super aggressive high five to Cash?
I actually just said thank you, director. It was the first. He'd just been confirmed as director.
We have to. Right now, I have a friend of mine I mentioned earlier, Dennis Price, who's getting a hard time at the academy and has written complaints because he aggressively high-fived someone at the academy. So
I'll watch out for that.
Yeah, exactly. But I think Cash is up for an aggressive high five. Yeah. He seems like that kind of guy.
He had a stiff handshake.
After 16 years, he's still stuck in Washington, D.C. But today, we got him here on the Resilient Show. Awesome to have you here, Richie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna get into your book, The Riot Diet, and you also have a new book dropping soon.
Yeah, Riot Diet 2 will cover all the MAGA unrest, and Riot Diet 1 covers all the BLM stuff. So it's almost the perfect sequel.
Right on. Well, I mean, you've worked with some of the biggest names in media: Mark Levine, Tucker Carlson. I don't want to say MSNBC's
Al Sharpton.
Name.
Yeah,
Al Sharpton.
I served him his tea and toast. I was his PA. Yeah,
right.
I'd bring my own toaster to work to make sure his toast was perfectly toasted.
What was it like working with Al Sharpton?
Well, I mean, I was making $12 an hour as a production assistant,
right,
at MSNBC in Washington, and he would come down like pretty regularly, and he was always going through PAs. Like he didn't like the job that they were doing, and I would sprint the scripts down the hallway. I would make sure his tea and toast was well toasted, nice and hot when he showed up, delivered to him right at the door. So he chose me as his
I thought
PA.
Al Sharpton was oppressed.
Yeah, well, so he went from tea and toast to a dietary supplement as he was rapidly losing weight. Okay. So eventually, I just had to get the tea and the dietary supplement. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. I mean, I always did it with a smile on my face because that was my job.
That's right.
But he was not the nicest guy in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, look, right now you're a really conservative dude. You've, your journey is really, but you started off like MSNBC. You started off on really left wing.
Well, I showed up in DC in 2008 to study Arabic at Georgetown and Middle Eastern history, and Barack Obama had promised to pull all the troops out of Iraq by 2010, and he wrote that in an op-ed in the summer of 2008 when he was running for president. So I was knocking on doors for Obama in Virginia. I was an 18-year-old kid, idealistic. Yeah. And I was pitching all these people whose doors I was knocking on in Northern Virginia on Obama pulling the troops out of the Middle East. And over the course of the next 8 years, I witnessed him perpetuate a lot of the same policies that the neocons had implemented in the Middle East. And that was an eye-opening experience for me because I went from idealistic to jaded. So witnessing that and the way in which Washington, D.C. functioned and D.C. media functioned around that, I realized, it was all just the same gravy train chugging along the same track, regardless of whether it was red or blue. And when Trump came along, I knew he was going to win just because he was running as a change candidate, same as Bernie Sanders. So that's when I was at Levin TV at the time. And when I did my interview for Levin TV for the job, I sat down with the producers and they were like, okay, you made it to the second interview. Now we're going to tell you who this star is who's hosting the show. It's Mark Levine. And I was like, wow. And I knew the name, but I kind of feigned surprise. I really didn't know who he was. Went home and Googled him. And I realized behind Rush Limbaugh, he was tied with Hannity for the second biggest radio personality in America. I was like, how sheltered have I been growing up in the New York area and then moving to DC that I've worked in media for years and I don't even know really who this guy is. So that was really my opening up my eyes to the other side of America and the way that, that was during the Tea Party. And obviously that was a big change movement. And when Trump ran, I knew he was going to win. I actually met him in 2015 when he was on Saturday Night Live. And my mom has worked there since 1979. So I was like, I got to go to this show. This guy's going to be president.
Your mom's worked where?
At Saturday Night Live.
Really?
Yeah. For Lauren Michaels. Yeah, she's
I did
his
not
personal
know that.
assistant for years. She's got stories. She's the one who should write a book.
Oh, I bet. So what was it like working for Mark Levine? I mean, as a non-conservative, a young guy working your way into media.
Well, the most eye-opening thing for me was the contrast between the likes of Al Sharpton and Mark Levine. Mark Levine, he's definitely a fire breather when he's on air, but he's a super nice guy off air. And my dad, who passed away in 2017, right after I started at the Caller, at that time, this is about 2015, he was watching every show that I was doing the cold open for the show, and he'd watch every episode, and we'd do a call afterwards, and he'd be like, "This Levin guy's kind of got a point about this Constitution thing," and
because your dad's not
well, he
conservative.
wasn't, but his last vote the last lever he ever pulled, he voted for Trump, and he said, I asked him who he voted for after, and he had voted Democrat for I think like 30 years, and he said, I broke the dishes, and it wasn't until years after he passed away that I considered that metaphor. If you break a dish, you can't put it back together, and the implication was this is the last act of creative destruction of his boomer generation, and it was up to us, my two brothers and I, I'm the middle of three boys, to not put the dishes back together, but to make new ones. So that's what I tried to do with starting my own publishing company, because every publisher told me I had to pick a side, or that Trump wasn't going to make it through the primaries. This is in 2022 when I first started, and I was like, okay, I'm a pigeon press. I'm going to start. I'm not a peacock. That's a flightless, cocky bird at NBC. Not a penguin, also a flightless, useless bird. The pigeon just delivers the message from the streets straight to the people. No corporate interference.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about that, and you were just like, I'm going to do my own publishing company. And
Yep.
Yeah.
I had to do it on my own. It was not easy. And if I had known going into it, I might have reconsidered, but we got it done. And I had Anthony Swafford, who's the author of Jarhead, as my mentor. And so it wasn't until he came on board. My cousin actually, they had a couple of beers at a writing conference 20 years ago. May or may not have been a old Mercedes that was bashed up in the process, but they became good friends, and he put me in touch with Swafford. And he was the first professional who was like, I believe in what you're doing, because everybody else was like, you have to pick a side. You can't combine the memoir with the chronicling. You just got to stick to the red meat, either for a conservative or a left-leaning audience. And I was like, well, my story was the story of being stuck in between ever since I can remember as a middle brother. And I'm just going to write it the way that I want to write it. And with Swafford on board, I had the confidence to do it on my own.
What was I think, I guess I'll ask, what's your biggest lesson or biggest transformation point? Was there something that Mark Levine said particularly, or that you observed that made you like have a shift
Yeah,
in your ideology?
I remember exactly when it was. It was March. This is right before I started at the Caller. I started at the Caller in May of 2017. It was in March of 2017 when Trump tweeted about the wiretapping in Trump Tower. And everybody in the media was going nuts. Oh, there's not a wiretap. They don't even do that anymore. It's like, well, actually, what they were doing is far more invasive. They were tapping into the cell phones of people within the campaign. And Levin uncovered basically the fact that these FISA warrants had been approved for this invasive surveillance of the Trump campaign and after Trump was elected. And that's when I realized how entrenched the unelected bureaucracies were in DC and how big of a problem it was that the most powerful intelligence apparatus that's ever been constructed by mankind was basically running unchecked. Furthermore, they were actually spying on the guy who had just won the presidency. And that was the moment when I realized that, like that was Barack Obama, the guy who I had been campaigning for. That was his administration who was doing that. And that was, I think, the moment when I was like, okay, this is very real, and this is not okay. So this isn't the America that I thought I lived in.
So then you leave there, you go to Daily Caller. How'd that take place, by the way?
So December, I cover it in the book, but in December of 2016, right after Trump won, my friend who I was bartending while I was working at NBC because I was making $12 an hour, so I had no choice if I wanted to pay rent in DC. And my bartending buddy, Christian Daytalk, he was working at the Daily Caller during the election, and I saw he was getting tons of views on Facebook, and like the cameras they were using, the production, it looked like they were filming it through a shower curtain, kind of. And having been a video editor at Mark Levine, I thought I could definitely add something to this. And they have this massive platform, and we could build a de facto mini news outlet, video outlet around the front page site that was all print. And so I contacted Christian after the election, and he was like, okay, come in for an interview. And the night before the interview, I was playing in a men's league hockey game, and I got hit, and I got 28 stitches in my face. And I called Christian from the emergency room at like 12 a.m. I woke him up. I was like, dude, I don't think I can come in. I have 28 stitches in my face. And he's like, no, they're going to love it. And so I was literally like bleeding when I showed up to interview with Neil Patel, who was Tucker Carlson's roommate in college and was the CEO of the Caller at the time. And that was so May of 2017. And this is what I try to express to the readers in the book is Tucker Carlson was on the 5. This was right when he got the primetime slot, and Trump had just taken office. And I didn't realize how the toothpaste was going to come out of the tube, the way in which both Trump and Tucker in their various spheres would become the heroes to half of America and the enemy to the other half. So I grew up outside New York, and like all my friends from home were like, how could you possibly be working there for this guy? And it was crazy to me the way in which culture and politics became so intertwined so quickly. And I wrote the book not writing it just to appeal to the audience today, this trench warfare that we have in our political landscape, but for somebody in 20 years to pick it up and get a feel for how quickly things changed. And I don't think that it was, I think Trump was not the disease, he was a symptom, and he actually picked up on a lot of the discontent that Americans had. But, obviously the media blamed everything on him. But really, if you watch this campaign with building the wall, with the immigration issues, which is such a big issue in 2024, that message of changing the way that things were run in DC resonated with the American people who were outside the Beltway, and the people I was working alongside in media just couldn't wrap their heads around that. And if you drive through Texas, you get a whole different picture of what America is as compared to DC or New York or LA.
Just from your experience working like with these outlets and seeing the opposing outlets, do you believe that journalism has pretty much, like journalism as it's meant to be, has pretty much died and has become bias propaganda media outlets? Or
yes,
does journalism still exist?
And I think a lot of it is tied to personal animus towards Trump, and they've dug in their heels so deeply that after 2016, I was again naive, thinking, okay, there's going to be a reckoning in media where people are going to say, okay, well, maybe this guy had a point, and maybe we've been turning our noses away from these people who have been overlooked by our politicians for decades. And, you know, all of the jobs got shipped overseas. I mean, you listen to Bernie Sanders' message, he sounds like Trump. If you just take it out of context, he says they shipped 3 million jobs overseas to China.
Yeah.
And
that's good, by the way.
The dignity. Yeah, I've been working on it. And actually at that time, you know, I was kind of like torn between Trump and Bernie. And I think it's really hard for people to realize that a lot of Obama voters, because Obama ran on hope and change. There's another one. Yeah. That one's not as good. But he ran on a change platform, and then he didn't change anything ultimately. Yeah. And the fact that Trump voters were also Obama voters was like impossible for the media to figure out, because they had this narrative that Trump was also a racist. He wasn't a racist when Jeff Zucker, then the head of NBC Entertainment, picked up Trump for The Apprentice and like rode the coattails of the success of that show. And I cover in the book, the third day I was at MSNBC, literally my third day at work. I guess I had an inkling of an instinct of what was going on before I got to live in, because Jeff Zucker came down. It was like his last 2 months working at NBC. He went to CNN right after that. And he was going on about Rock Center, which was hosted by Brian Williams, about how it was going to be the millennial 60 Minutes. And back then, the millennials were like Gen Z now. They're the young demographic. And he kept on saying, we're going to use what's trending to inform our news decisions. Trending. He kept saying trending, like that was the buzzword of the time. And it was like an electric shock. He said, does anyone have any questions? And my hand shot up. I was literally training on the first desk where you're at the phone bank. You're like a glorified secretary in the middle of the newsroom. And everyone was like, who is this? Who does this kid think he is? Asking the president of the company a question on his third day. And yeah, most of the people in the bureau, it took them a while to warm up to me after that. But I was like, if you're going to use what's trending to inform your decisions, well, what's trending right now is like cats flying through the air like Instagram is no longer forwarding photos to Twitter. Like, is that what you're going to use to inform the American public on what's going on? Like the latest internet trend. And he had like kind of whitewashed the answer and glossed over with a couple more buzzwords. You know, the C-level executive, we've long been a bastion of informing the public, and yes, we'll use that. And it was such a BS answer that it was evident to me from that moment on. Luckily, I didn't get fired, but it wouldn't have mattered. I was only making $12 an hour. But that from that moment on, it was very clear that I was like working in a candle factory, and electricity had just been invented. And cable news and print media had a certain way of operating. And if you look at the latest election, Trump really capitalized on new media, like podcasts like this. We got these little cameras that are doing what a giant broadcast camera used to do. And that's also what we capitalized on during the protests and riots in 2020. All the newscasters were sitting outside the protest zone saying, well, it's mostly peaceful. It's a party-like atmosphere. And they had these huge cameras, and we were like a young team. We were nimble, and we were like, we're just going to go in there with our cell phones, hang out, ask people what's up, what's going on, and show the American public what's happening without commentary. So to get back to your original question, I think news has been so mired by the Trump era, and well, we're not going to if anything that he does has to be bad. And secondarily, it's also like opinion has now become objectivity. Mm-hmm. And so all these people are saying, like, I'm sitting in my ivory tower in my multi-million-dollar studio telling Americans who's right and who's wrong. And that's part of the reason why I started my own publishing company, because what I sought to do with the book was not to give people an objective view of, okay, here's everything that happened and here's exactly who's right and who's wrong, but here's a subjective look into what I experienced. And that goes back to like the gonzo journalists of the last time that we had massive civil unrest, at least on a national scale, like we saw in 2020 in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And the Hunter S. Thompsons and Joan Didions were doing gonzo journalism, which was giving you a subjective lens into their experience so that you could glean a view into what it was like to be there, and why they asked the questions that they did, why they went where they did, and just let the audience decide for themselves. And I think there's a perception now in media, well, there has been for a long time, that, you know, Americans are too dumb to make their own informed decisions. So I just laid it all out there of what I experienced, and, you know, let the reader decide for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, there's been, you're right. There's just so much bias put into, and we just seen, you know, Elon Musk and his team at Doge. Part of the uncovering of some of this fraud, waste, and abuse was at USAID, and that they were spending millions and millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. I think I may be misquoting, maybe billions with a B, to fund left-leaning media outlets, journalists and media outlets around the world. And as I've seen that come, I'm like, that makes sense, because so many times you see these clips where, like, one news anchor says something and the other says the exact same thing, and then they show hundreds of them saying the same thing.
Yep, exactly.
So if they're getting the funding, they're getting the direction, and I mean, so is that an indication that our media is bought and paid for on a global scale?
Absolutely. Firstly, when I was working at MSNBC, I saw the scripts, and I saw the dayside and the primetime programming, and they'd all talk about the same 5 stories over and over and over again. So there wasn't even a different flavor. There's obviously different hosts, but there was no different perspective coming out of any of these shows. And by the way, they're all interjected with, like, ads from Pfizer. So the way in which Americans were receiving news about what was going on was based upon an actual literal script. And that whole corporatized hierarchy of, you know, all these massive expensive cameras, these big studios, hundreds of staff and employees, it's all built around a corporate structure that has to synergize with all the other massive corporations. And it just so happens that, you know, pharmaceutical industry has a huge influence on news. And Politico was one of the news outlets that was receiving. So everybody, you know, was saying, oh, Politico got, I think it was $8 or $9 million a year from USA. And what they found was, oh, no. It was individual employees who had subscriptions to Politico Pro, which is like $50,000 a year. And my question is like, at what point, what amount of money would that become a conflict of interest? Because $8 million a year, they say that the revenue is $200 million a year, but $8 million is it's no drop in the bucket. That's a massive amount of money. And how many of these employees are actually using that? Like, just to put it very simply, so you're telling me that the government is paying Politico $8 million a year to tell them what's going on in the government. And when you have that symbiotic relationship that's existed between DC media and the political establishment, what you would call the uniparty, for 40 years. I worked alongside Kristen Welker when she was in the White House. She was on the weekends at the time. Now she's the host of Meet the Press, but this was in 2013, 14. And, you know, she was trying to work her way up through the White House briefing room. And she would always ask hard questions. She wanted to ask hard questions, but there's a very fine line between asking too hard of a question, because if you ask too hard of a question, then you're never going to get into question again in that briefing room. Mm-hmm. And if you contrast that to Trump's first administration and what's going on right now, it's a completely different picture. I mean, obviously every person in there is asking hard questions. And so over the course of Clinton was the one who rolled out the White House briefing room. They covered up the pool and they created a briefing room in there because they wanted to create daily content, video content for the 24-hour news outlets that had just been spun up in the 90s, CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. And so to see the way in which these reporters had to play the game in order to rise through the ranks of that hierarchy was illuminating, as far as, like, the press is supposed to keep the government in check. And I studied Arabic because I lived right outside New York. My mom worked in Manhattan on 9/11. And then watching the Iraq invasion in 2003, that was the linchpin. The moment that we were planning that invasion, the press, it was beholden to them to ask the tough questions, and they didn't. They just took what the CIA was saying, hook, line, and sinker. And the fourth estate, the media, is supposed to hold truth to power. And over the course of those decades, they didn't do that. And that's what ultimately gave Trump the opportunity to win the presidency, because they had been pulling the wool over the eyes of the public for so long. And people were like, yeah, he was like these wars in the Middle East are a disaster, and the American public apparently agreed because they voted him in.
Who do you like with these? I mean, if you have a script, right? You're talking about these scripts, then clearly there's an agenda. Who do you think's behind the curtain? Who's writing the scripts? Who's pushing the agenda?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at COVID, that's a great indicator of who's pulling the levers. And pharmaceutical lobby in DC is incredibly powerful, but also their advertising. If you watch Fox News or MSNBC, you're going to get mostly drug ads in between commercial breaks. And they're not even really converting that many sales from those ads. What it really is giving money through advertising to the news companies. And at that time, that's when the press should be asking tough questions. And what was really illuminating to me, I had gone from cable news to digital, thinking this is the new digital revolution where free speech, we're going to have these new town squares. But I would put a Tucker Carlson clip where he's interviewing somebody about the COVID vaccine onto Facebook, and I would get a strike because you're not allowed to talk about that. And I'm like, so you're telling me that everybody has to get this shot, but we're not allowed to ask a single question about it in what's effectively now our town square. And so to see the way in which that censorship, that corporate censorship that was now originating out of Silicon Valley, creep into our public discourse, not creep in, but smash down the door into our public discourse and say, you can't say this. And we would get a strike after the 2020 election. Oh, you streamed a Trump rally and these words were side by side, stolen election. And you're not allowed to put those words side by side. Otherwise, if you get another strike, we're going to shut down that's where most of our revenue came from, Facebook and YouTube. Well, then you're going to shut down your business and you're going to have to fire everybody. So ultimately, I had no choice but to play ball because, I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. So that's what I talk about a lot in the book is what videos went viral, what news outlets picked up how much was paid for them, how I kept the business functioning, and also like what got censored and what got demonetized. Because now I think with Elon Musk at Twitter, people are looking at that much more closely and all the censorship that took place during COVID and in 2020 after the election. But ultimately, news, you should be able to ask those tough questions. And if those platforms aren't providing that, then people are going to go elsewhere. Right.
Well, elsewhere, I mean, there's lots of elsewheres now, right? There's podcasts. I mean, I personally believe that, not saying this because I have one, but podcasts are the solution to this, the biased media on both sides. Like it's, because now my audience knows my worldview and perspectives, and they could tune into someone they feel like-minded with, and that my audience is going to, be more in line with my views, and maybe they go listen to podcasts with someone that has different views than mine. That's an option. It's kind of a free market for it. Do you see this being a solution to or alternative to mainstream media?
Absolutely, and I go to podcasts because, like Apple Podcasts, for example, they don't have the same censorship guardrails that these social media platforms do. And secondarily, they don't have. You're searching out. Okay, I'm going to this guy's podcast and I'm going to listen to it. And on the social media platforms, I talk a lot in the book about what voices surface to the top of your feed, your For You feed, which is catered by these multi-billion-dollar algorithms. Well, the answer is it's the loudest and most hyperbolic voices that are saying, "Oh, Trump's going to destroy this," or Biden's going to destroy that, and it's that hyperbolic approach to what's going on in the world that's surfacing on those platforms. And secondarily, the videos that you're seeing are like little excerpts. And I talk about the broader context. I did this interview and then this little piece went viral. And what happened in Kenosha is the perfect example of the way in which those things can be taken out of context and these caricatures can be created, these narratives can be created out of major American moments, high impact moments that will direct people one way or another. And if you're just picking the facts that are relevant to your political tribe, then you'll surface to the top of that echo chamber's feed. But that's not the best way for our discourse to take place. And if you're at a podcast and we're sitting down for 2 hours, you can actually get into the nuance of these situations and not just have to say, that 5-second soundbite that'll go viral.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on Fox a lot and other outlets, and I'm getting brought on like maybe as my opinion or as an expert on a topic, and like I get maybe in a 3-minute hit, I get half of it, right?
Yes,
I get a
exactly.
minute and a half of talking points. There's no depth to it at all. There's no way to to quantify why I believe this way or what
Yeah, and you're staring into a camera lens. You're like, it's like a black iris.
Yeah.
You're not actually looking somebody in the eye and talking and having a real conversation. So there's a really impersonal nature to cable news, not to mention the fact that there's this stifled, well, this is what's going on in this robotic voice.
Yeah.
And I think people now, obviously 2024 indicated that people are now craving more genuine conversation. So I think, people have a dark outlook, maybe some have a positive outlook, but I as far as the way that the media landscape is changing and the conversations are changing, I think longer term, things are on the up.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, same. So at the Daily Caller, when it's around the time I met you, you're doing some crazy stuff. So Tucker sending you out there to go. I mean, you're like embedded, kind of undercover, right? You're going undercover with BLM, Antifa. You're living in the city of CHAZ.
Yeah, the CHAZ is crazy.
CHAZ, yeah.
CHAZ is perhaps, well.
So tell us why you did that. Like, what was the reason that Tucker and Daily Caller sent you to do that, and what was the agenda there?
Well, the second chapter is called "The Apocalypse is Nigh in Kauai" because Trump announced that he was suspending international travel, but not domestic. And me being the reckless goofball that I am, I was like, we got swell on the way to Hawaii. And I didn't really, this is in March of 2020, at the very beginning of the pandemic. I didn't really know what was coming. And my buddy who lived in Kauai was like, yeah, come on out and stay with me. And so I flew there and was surfing with him. And as that was happening, the entire American economy and our entire business model was getting flushed down the drain because we relied on like on the ground reporting. We had a very young team. We would go do man on the street interviews. We'd cover protests, all that stuff. And everybody got locked down at home. Nobody wants to watch a bunch of 20 somethings sitting in their shoddy apartments talking about COVID. So as my business model collapsed, all the revenue went out the window. And
this is for Daily Caller.
This is for Daily Caller. And I'd spent 3.5 years building our team from 2 people to 10 people. And so we had an overhead. We had to keep the lights on. We had to keep everybody paid. And when George Floyd happened, that first weekend in Washington, D.C. and across the country, I was in New York with my family on that Friday that the White House was nearly overrun. And everybody's reporting, oh, Trump retreats to the bunker, what a coward. And I've talked to Secret Service agents as well as my own reporters who were there. And it was very close to that fence was very close to being overrun. The fence is much taller now, but the Secret Service agents were getting bricks thrown at them. There were dozens of them that were injured. It was a very serious situation. There was a fire that was lit by Shelby Talcott, who was my coworker at the time. She was a former pro tennis player. Total, can I say badass?
Yeah, you can say badass.
She's a total badass. And so she filmed that fire. She filmed looting that was happening in the surrounding area. And an unpaid intern that we had, Jorge Ventura, this is our little riot squad who traveled around. He filmed Leland Vittert, who was at Fox News at the time, getting assaulted right in front of the White House with his cameraman with his big camera, very conspicuous. And the BLM people were beating up on Leland Vittert. And actually, Vittert gave credit to Jorge for shining his camera at them because people realized, okay, we're getting filmed. We can't mess around anymore. But I came down on that Monday morning, which was the St. John's Church. And I was right in front of the Bible photo op. And I was actually literally in the book. I have a screenshot. I'm wearing my hockey helmet. I just removed the mask because I couldn't play hockey anymore because of COVID. So I removed the mask. I'd seen the bricks thrown over the weekend. And I had my hockey helmet on and I'm sitting there filming with my cell phone.
You put your hockey helmet on.
Yeah, I had my hockey helmet on. Yeah. And so I'm squatted down in front of the police shield, just a block up from where the headline read, Trump tear gassed and shoots rubber bullets for Bible photo op. And the implication of that chyron, which is like the lower third on a news, it's a technical term, it implied that Trump had cleared Lafayette Park so that he could have a Bible photo op. An IG investigation a year later revealed that it was the decision of the park police because of what had happened over the weekend. And they decided to clear the square and put up a non-scalable fence to protect the White House. And secondarily, it wasn't tear gas, it was smoke grenades. So that's much different. And it wasn't rubber bullets, it was pepper balls and pepper spray. And the pepper balls are like little paintballs that are propelled by CO2, not an explosive shell. And I've been shot by both. And I can tell you, and I've experienced smoke grenades and actual chemical tear gas. And it's like comparing a pool noodle to a baseball bat.
Yeah.
So that hyperbolic headline set the tone. This was like a week before they formed BLM Plaza in DC, which just got taken down or jackhammered out. And that set the tone for the entire summer of love of, Orange Man bad and the police, his fascist police, and all cops are bastards. And it was crazy to then not only see it in DC, but travel around the country to the CHAZ in Seattle, to Portland, to New York, and to Kenosha, and to see that was the most common phraseology. All cops are bastards. Mm-hmm. And you're like, really? Like every single cop, you really think that? And secondarily, the most galvanizing thing at that time was like, if you really want to get the crowd riled up, you would say, what do you all think about Trump? And so Black Lives Matter was a movement, but ultimately it was during an election cycle and it was an anti-Trump movement. But there was a moment in Philly in October where one of the activists stood up and got on the megaphone and she was like, so you're telling me that your solution to this problem is that you're gonna vote for the guy who authored the 1994 crime bill and the top cop in California? Like, are you serious? So everybody was like, had the spotlight shined at Trump as the bad guy. And Portland is the perfect example where he brought in the DHS troops to defend the federal courthouse and, his fascist stormtroopers. But ultimately, the solution to that was going back to the same old stuff that everybody had voted Trump in to get rid of. And so I think like when 2024 came around and they rolled out Kamala Harris without even a primary, that I knew that Trump was going to win after that, because it was like he was running for change and she couldn't even answer when she was on The View. She couldn't even answer. They said, would you do anything different than what Joe Biden did? And she's like, no. She just didn't even have an answer.
Right.
So she was continuing the gravy train that benefits a small proportion of the population, mostly isolated on the coasts, and Trump was running on a change platform, and that's why he's president now. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I want to spend a little more time on your kind of undercover work, because I went out to DC to do an interview for you. I can't remember, you were interviewing me about something. I think I was speaking on the Hill for Veteran Affairs or something like that. But you, at the time, you had just came back from Portland. And you still had battle wounds. You were like,
oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you had
a
like
scar here and on my
some
leg.
scars, and you were like cut open from.
Well, it was a tear gas shell. So what they're supposed to do is fire the tear gas shells off the ground to reduce the velocity.
Yeah.
But what I would do, we wouldn't wear like press, because I'd rather be at the mercy of the police than be at the mercy of a mob of people. I saw multiple journalists get punched in the head. I've had plenty of concussions, and I prefer not to get punched in the head. And I'd rather take a riot munition than a sucker punch that comes out of nowhere from a mob that surrounds you for filming the wrong thing. So this was actually my first night in Portland, and I got my gas mask on, which I had just gotten from an Army surplus store, because Shelby and Jorge had been in Portland, and Shelby said, the tear gas out here, it hits different. Like it is, we need gas masks. So I went and got everybody gas masks, and I'm wearing my gas mask. I'm literally live on Facebook to the Daily Caller audience, and I'm in between the protesters and the police. That was always my job, was like get in the middle of it and just show people what's going on, whether it's the police beating up on the protesters, rioters, or the other way around. We're going to publish it no matter what.
And a lot of this, some of this content was actually on Fox.
Yeah. So, and I go through in the book exactly which clips went on Fox, exactly how much we sold them for, what we sold to Daily Mail, what MSNBC picked up on. And, so I'm in between the two groups, and this DHS officer from behind his gas mask aims the tear gas launcher right at me. It's like that breech-loaded 40 millimeter, and he loads it and he aims it at me, and I just shake my head like, no, don't do it, and he just blasts me in the arm, and so my arm splits open and my phone falls on the ground, and I'm swearing live, and very unprofessional, but it was dire circumstances, and so I'm bleeding, and I go to pick up my phone, and the guy must have reloaded and picked it back up because I looked back up when I picked up my phone and he had it aimed back at me and not shooting it off the ground, and he blasted me in the leg. So those are the two wounds, was on my arm and my leg. And then I got shot with like hundreds of pepper balls over the course of the week that we were there. But that chapter is called The Battle of the Leaf Blowers. And the reason
why the leaf?
Okay. Yeah. And this just goes to show, and this is what I'm saying is like, I'm just trying to like, it's like the whole world went crazy for a year. And so I'm like writing this and I'm like, was that real? Like, did that really happen? But our most viral video from Portland was the rioters were so successful in pushing the tear gas back at the courthouse. They would come out with like 20 leaf blowers. So these protests, and to be clear, there'd be 5,000 people who came out for the speeches, who had, most of them had nonviolent, good intentions, and 4,500 of them would go home, and 500 would stay in front of the courthouse, start smashing into the fence. And by 12 a.m., they're specifically intending to agitate the police, to bring them out, to create a spectacle of violence. They've got their umbrellas, they've got shields, they had lacrosse sticks to throw the tear gas back. They had welding gloves so that they could pick up the hot tear gas shells and throw them back. But they were so successful with the leaf blowers that the DHS got their own leaf blowers. So they're on the inside of the fence using their leaf blowers. And this clip that I got, I'm on the other side of the fence and this rioter is blasting his leaf blower, giving the DHS guy with the leaf blower the finger, and the DHS guy is aimed at him, and it's the battle of the leaf blowers. It's like the most ridiculous thing you could. I mean, if I had have like made this a fiction, like, people would be like, "This is the most ridiculous fiction book I've ever read." So I guess reality's stranger than fiction these days.
So there's, as you watching this, like, is people really this passionate to riot and protests, or is it conscribed? Are there instigators? You know, or I mean, I've seen the pictures and heard the rumors and heard from you about people putting bricks on the corner, staging things, bussing people in. Being on the ground, what did you see to that context of, as far as like agitators and people staging these riots?
Well, in the book, I call them the umbrella gang, because think about the Proud Boys. If you ask a Proud Boy if he's a Proud Boy, it says it on his shirt. You know, that's inherent to the organization. They're going to tell you I'm a Proud Boy. Antifa, they're not going to tell you. And occasionally you'd see a flag or you'd see a patch. But the way that you could tell the guys who were the hardcore guys was they'd come out with umbrellas to stop the pepper balls. And that was like kind of their shields. Or they'd have wooden shields and they'd be wearing gas masks. But what I did see was the same people in different cities and people coming in. I think it was a combination of the fact that you had the pandemic, which made people crazy in the first place. You're cooped up in your house, you're told to lock down, and the only reason that you're allowed to go outside, you can't even go to church, but you can go to a protest, a BLM protest. And even de Blasio in New York, he said, oh yeah, well, religious services are one thing, but 400 years of slavery is another. And so basically saying, we're not going to contact trace BLM protesters, but we're going to crack down on religious services. And so people were cooped up. They were angry. They were frustrated. They were fearful by all this fear mongering about the virus, and they're going to die from COVID. And I also saw the BLM snack van, which was this famous van that would hand out snacks, and actually that park across Lonsdale Park, which was across from the courthouse, they found improvised explosives. I saw a Molotov cocktail that was thrown. There's an inherent organization behind the curtain there that requires, most of the kids that I saw out there couldn't tie their shoes, let alone, you know, make a Molotov cocktail. So it was very hard for me to peek behind that curtain, because the people who are actually implementing those tactics, it trickles down to all the other people who are watching, like the use of the leaf blowers and Molotov cocktails. But the ones who are actually really architecting that, they're never going to tell you that they're doing it. And Umbrella Man is another. There was a famous instance where a guy started a fire. And I saw the same thing in Kenosha, where people came from out of town and very, very effectively would smash a window, squirt a little bottle of lighter fluid into the car, and then just torch it. And those people, you know, they got the gloves, they're They got the masks up to their eyes, and they're in and out. And so those aren't the people who I have an opportunity to interview. And all I can say is what I witnessed. And those people are not the same people as the kids that I'm interviewing around a garbage fire in front of the federal courthouse who came from Seattle because, you know, they saw on the news that, you know, there was this spectacle of violence going on in front of the Portland courthouse, and it was like, you know, riot tourism. So there's two distinctly different groups. And what I can say is that it only takes a very small handful of people to start smashing into the shields. People see one of their fellow tribesmen get billy clubbed or get pepper sprayed, and it activates this different part of your brain, which you're obviously aware of, where it's not the frontal cortex that's doing all the thinking. It's the lizard brain, the
limbic
primal
system.
Yeah, exactly. The fight or flight part of your brain that turns on. And so when you have 500 people and 5 of them create that scenario, then, and the same thing happened on January 6th, and people see their fellow guy wearing a MAGA hat get pepper sprayed, it turns on a completely different part of your brain. And that's what's really hard. All the keyboard warriors at home are saying, oh, you know, these people are this or they're that. It's like when you're actually there and you actually have pepper spray in your eyes, you stop thinking rationally. And so it's really easy to agitate and create a scenario in which these chaotic things unfold, where people who went out there with good intentions turn into basically, you know, this animalistic primal person who's just going to commit violence. And so it's a snowball effect that's very easy to start.
Who do you think was behind a lot of these Antifa and BLM?
Well, I mean, number one, who was bailing them out is the first question. And obviously George Soros did a lot of fundraising for, I would see people in Portland who got arrested and then the next night they'd be out.
Well, he was fundraising, but he was also getting USAID money.
Yes, and also
so
he was fundraising
money
for prosecutors as well. So not only the bail fund that was getting them out and posting their bail, but also the prosecutors who are the ones in the courtrooms who are deciding what their sentencing was. And if you compare, everybody's like, oh, well, you can't compare, you know, the federal courthouse in Portland to what happened on January 6th because it's the heart of democracy. And it's like, well, even everything else aside, I saw people who assaulted police officers in Portland who would get let out the next night. And then on January 6th, they get thrown in jail for 70 days for picking up a lectern and carrying it 39 feet, you know, walking in through an open door. And so the same thing happened on January 6th that happened at all these different BLM riots, which is there's a small group of people who are intent on agitating the police and a much larger group of people who get caught up in the mix. The difference between the two was that there was a selective use of the justice system because of political ideology behind the protest. And so,
and a consistent fact was it probably was the same agitators.
I was actually didn't realize it until a couple months later that I was on January 6th. I showed up to the Western Front, and my first thought was with the gas. By this point in Kenosha, I was unprepared. I only had a gas mask. But by this point, I had bulletproof vest, bulletproof backpack, ballistic helmet, and a gas mask. And I showed up to the Western Front. I thought everything was going to pop off.
This is Gen 6,
is Gen
the Capitol.
6. Yep.
Right. Because you said in the book that you were more prepared than the police.
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
And that was my first thought. I was like, why am I better prepared than these cops? And like 90% of them didn't even have gas masks. So they're getting pepper sprayed and they're running away. And once you get pepper sprayed, it's pretty hard to battle against 10,000 people. And secondarily, there were like 140 of them on the Western Front and like 10,000 people. And I've literally witnessed abortion marches in DC that have larger police presence around the Capitol than what I witnessed on January 6th. And so it's not only the couple of people who, you know, basically tore down the barricades there were these flimsy metal barricades that were surrounding the Capitol. By the time I got there, the no trespassing signs were like flipped over in the grass. So all these people didn't even see those barricades because they were gone by the time the crowd showed up. But it's not just that group of people. It's also who was in charge of the policing. And so if you look at CHAZ in Seattle, Carmen Best, who is the police chief there, she capitulated the Eastern Precinct in Seattle to the protest in the spirit of, quote, de-escalation. And so they literally abandoned the police precinct in a major American city and gave up a 6-block area to the protest. And what was the first thing the protesters did? They put up barriers, checkpoints, not a wall, because that'd be Trumpy. It was a barrier.
Barriers.
And it's an open carry state. So there were guys with AK-47s and ARs. And in the book, I cite one guy. The first night we showed up, we went to one of those checkpoints. We're interviewing the guards. And one of the guys is like your typical, what people would see as the prototypical Antifa guy, which is like a skinny white dude wearing a really expensive jacket and a really expensive waterproof backpack. And he had a Desert Eagle that the holster was attached to a needlepoint belt, and it was swinging around, flagging anybody who was close enough. And I was like, hey, dude, that's an interesting holster you got there. Where'd you get that? He goes, my mom made it for me, the needlepoint belt. And so that's very indicative of the chaotic situation that was created by the politicians in
Mayor
Durkin and Police Chief Carmen Best and the governor. We're all saying, we're not going to let Trump and his fascists come in here. So what we're going to do is give it all up to the protesters and virtue signal about how we're so great for doing that. And the police were not responding to calls within the CHAZ. And actually there was one instance where an auto shop, very eerily similar to Kenosha, was a guy, according to the owners of the auto shop, was trying to light a fire in there about a block outside the CHAZ, and they had called police, and police did not respond to the call. And so a mob heard that a guy was being held at the auto shop, and they ran over there, and we ran over after them, and they're smashing into the fence surrounding the shop. And I vaulted over the fence to get an interview with the dudes who were standing out in front of the shop with guns. One of the guys had an AR, again, parallel to Kenosha. And we're talking to them, and the guy basically said, I can't believe that the governor has let it get to this point. Like, it's not that we're against protest, we're against chaos. And so there were sexual assaults, there were all kinds of 911 calls that happened over the 3 weeks or month that the CHAZ existed. And they didn't actually shut it down until not one, but two one 16-year-old kid and one 19-year-old young man, black Americans, were killed at those same checkpoints. And nobody was charged. Nobody was investigated for those shootings. And the police obviously weren't there. So all these companies that were based in Seattle, Microsoft and Boeing and Starbucks and Amazon, they're all donating hundreds of millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter related causes. And yet I didn't find any evidence that they donated to those kids' families. Mm-hmm. And so they created the situation in which these black kids died. And yet everybody just picked up and moved on after that. But there was the most poignant instance in Seattle for me was when we marched from the East Precinct, which was abandoned, followed a march to the West Precinct, which is in the heart of the commercial district where all these corporations are headquartered. And we were literally, as the sun was setting, in the shadow of the 3-tower Amazon complex, who, by the way, doubled their revenue during COVID because everyone was locked down at home or ordering Amazon. And everybody's giving their finger to the cops in this little 2-story police precinct. And they're sitting on the other side of the plate glass, just kind of like shaking their heads like, what's going on here? Everybody's giving them the finger. And behind them is this massive corporation that's making more money than it ever has before. And, you know, saying, oh, we're virtuous, so don't look at our corporate boardroom, right, for being any semblance of part of the problem. But the cops are the bad guys. And so as long as the cops were the bad guys, then the corporate entities stayed out of the crossfire, and that's just the way they wanted it.
Hey, I'm super proud that Smith & Wesson Firearms is a supporter of this show. I have been shooting Smith & Wesson Firearms since I was a kid. This is one of America's most patriotic companies that has been around 170 years. The Resilient Show is honored to partner with Smith & Wesson. I personally use Smith & Wesson Firearms every day for my everyday carry. I keep Smith & Wesson Firearms in my home for my home defense. When I'm out on the range practicing, it is a Smith & Wesson at the end of my grip. So check them out, and I hope you join me in carrying one of America's most iconic firearms. You see, like you said, you move forward to January 6th, and you go back to the incident was created by the people in charge of the police, people in charge of security, which would have been Nancy Pelosi, refused to meet Trump's request for extra security for J6.
And I mean, to be fair, I think ultimately, if Trump really, really, really wanted National Guard out there, he probably could have done it. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of resistance, and that's not to be forgotten.
Sure.
And the Capitol Police commissioner resigned immediately afterwards. But I think, you know, there was an idea that, and even I, going into January 6th, I thought, oh, they're going to have tons of cops around the Capitol, and you know, it's just going to be like the Stop the Steals. There might be some clashes after sundown when all the MAGA folks leave, and you know the counter protesters encounter them, and there'll be some street clashes. But I think that there was an idea that, number one, that MAGA people wouldn't do that, and number two, it would be bad optics to have such a massive National Guard presence surrounding, you know, a Trump rally. It's like, well, why do you need the National Guard? I thought your people were pro-police. But again, like, once the clashes started, and once the tear gas started getting fired into the crowd, and once the pepper spray was hitting that front line, it activated an entire domino effect that by the time I went into the Capitol, the door, you know, the police had completely resigned their post. And actually, secondarily, the scaffolding that was set up, that was the second thought that I had. The scaffolding that was set up for the inauguration was like a siege tower, because the police had their line set up along the Western Front, and I climbed up in the inauguration tower that was set up for the media. And I'm up above, and I'm watching these clashes take place. But what I'm also watching are all these people going around the police line and climbing in through the scaffolding. And so they went in unencumbered. And once the flow of people, once the police line broke, there were thousands of people pouring up the stairs. And actually, I was like, I guess I got to go in. And I actually climbed down the tower and saw the long line of people, and decided to go around the line and climb up the wall. So I climbed up this 20-foot wall, and I actually had my skateboard, because when the Uber hit traffic, I knew I was going to hit traffic. I skateboarded down there to get there as quickly as possible. And as I'm climbing up over the wall, this guy yanks me up, and my skateboard fell down. And as I'm conga lining into the Capitol, I mean, everybody was literally just flowing into these open doors. The same guy who pulled me up, taps me on the shoulder, and he goes, "Here we go, brother." And he gave me my skateboard back. It had fallen 20 feet. And they, like, firemen passed it back up to me, as if, like, I guess because I looked so prepared. I don't know. Like, but that was like kind of a good indication of like this kind of like team mentality. And then there was, you know, there were hundreds of people in the rotunda when I got in there. And I followed one group all the way to the House doors. And there were about 20 people outside the House doors. So hundreds of people in the Capitol, 20 people outside the House doors. One of them had smashed the glass. And there's that famous photo. I was right behind the guy who stuck his face through the glass and was looking in as there were still congressmen on the House floor, and the sergeant at arms had their guns pointed. And those 20 people, there were like 2 cops. And finally the police got reinforcements and pried them off the doors. And I followed everybody back into the rotunda. And then there was a guy who had decided to take that moment to smoke a joint. And so that 10-minute instance between those two examples of the guy smoking the joint and the guys trying to pry open the doors, there were 20 people who were genuinely trying to pry open the doors, and who genuinely fighting against the police, trying to pull them off. Then there were hundreds of others who had just walked in and were from all across the country and didn't really know, you know, there's kind of like, oh man, look at this, we're in the Capitol. Mm-hmm. And they got thrown in federal prison the same as the guys who were actually violent against police. And so that's what, you know, all of the partisanship aside, if you just look at the way that these genuinely nonviolent people, like I know Lectern guy now, he literally picked up he walked in through an open door, he picked up a lectern and he carried it 39 feet, and he was thrown in federal prison for 70 days. And that shows you just how two-tiered our justice system was during that time period.
Yeah. I want to take a step back because we kind of brushed over Kenosha. I know that's a pretty significant event in your life. In journalism, you were actually on the ground during when Kyle Rittenhouse, shot 3 people, and you were right there when that happened. Mm-hmm. Can you recount that story? Mm-hmm. What actually took place there?
We went to Kenosha. There was a local reporter named Tristan. Oh man, It's called The Rundown Live, his show. But anyways, he was a local reporter from Kenosha who filmed Tristan Harris. He filmed Jacob Blake was shot by police on Sunday, August 22nd or August 23rd. And the start of Kenosha is enigmatic of the entire BLM summer. Jacob Blake had a warrant out for his arrest for sexually assaulting his baby mama, who he had multiple kids with. And so there's a warrant out for his arrest. And she called the police and said he showed up. There was a restraining order and said, he's here. I'm afraid for my safety. And the police arrived. And the clip that went viral that stoked all of the violence in Kenosha showed Jacob Blake just escaping from police grasp and trying to open the door of the car of a vehicle and getting shot, as everybody in the media said 7 times in the back. It was 4 times in the back, 3 times in the side. But what was not included in that video clip was the fact that he was tased twice before that he wrestled with police, that according to police, he was armed with a knife, and that the kids inside the car, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, stated, oh, he was shot in front of his kids. Well, those kids are the ones that their mother had just called police. Oh, I'm worried for my and their safety. And there was a warrant out for his arrest for assaulting their mother. And so all of that stuff got thrown out the window to this little clip that went viral and started the violence that kicked off on Sunday night. And there were hundreds of burning cars, burning businesses that I saw from these local reporters. And so we decided to go on Monday morning. So we show up in the early evening on Monday, and the police are in front of the courthouse and they're defending the courthouse. And it was the same thing that happened the previous night and the third night, which was the night of the shooting, which is the police were defending the courthouse. It's a beautiful city, by the way, and very indicative of, like, it's a Rust Belt city. It would rival Detroit as the automotive hub of the United States in the early 1900s. There was a Rambler, which turned into Nash Automotive, which preceded the Model T Ford. And so this city was like an industrial powerhouse with beautiful municipal buildings, beautiful courthouse. The library was built by the same guy who built Union Station. And these beautiful buildings are what the cops are defending. And so they push everybody away from the courthouse, and everybody gets pushed into the commercial district in the surrounding area. And the police aren't like in DC. They don't know how to control a riot. So when those people were all pushed away, some of the scurrilous agitators smashed windows, were burning cars. And so on that first night that we were there, we filmed the whole rigmarole of them pushing everybody away. And then there was a auto shop that had burning cars in front of it. And there were guys, one of them was using a power washer, and then the other guys were literally using trash cans and buckets of water to put the fires out. And Shelby went to interview the guy and said, hey, why are you out here? And he just stopped the power washer for a second and turned around and said, do you see any fire department? And kept on at his work to stop the burning of the vehicles. So the next night they'd put up a fence around the courthouse, just the same fence that they had in Portland. And they forced everybody away with this massive police line of a couple hundred shields. They had National Guard, but all they were doing was defending the courthouse. And they pushed everybody away. And I went inside to get internet. I was probably using jammers because there was no internet out there. It wasn't even that. It was a couple hundred people who were out in front of the courthouse. So it wasn't like they were overwhelming the cell towers, but there was no internet. So I went into the hotel to get Wi-Fi, and I saw armed individuals in front of that same business that we had just interviewed the guy the night before. So that was an extension of the story. I dropped what I was doing. I ran from the hotel straight out to that same business, and Kyle Rittenhouse was standing right there. And this is approximately it was actually like 13, 14 minutes before the shooting took place. And I just said, does anyone want to do an interview? Because my job is just to ask people why they're out there, whether they're, guys defending businesses with guns, or whether they're rioters, or whether they're protesters. We interviewed the police as well during this whole thing. So we're trying to get all sides of the story. And Kyle was standing right there, and he said, yeah, I'll do it. And so I turned on my cell phone, just like I always do, and just say, hey, what's up, man? Why are you out here? He had a med kit. He said, I got my rifle to defend the business, and I have the med kit to provide medical attention. In his mind, this is genuinely the idea that he had in his head. I'm here to defend this business and also to help protesters who had been hurt by riot munitions. And so he had those genuine intentions. I asked him multiple times. He said he was EMT trained. Turned out he wasn't. He was lifeguard certified, which is not the same thing. But so I asked him that question, and that came out in court that was not true. But he did have good intentions. And that was apparent from the very moment that I was talking to him. Naively good
He's young
intentions.
too, right?
He was 17 years old.
Yeah.
So I told police night of that I thought he was 20 something, but he had a baby face. I couldn't imagine that somebody that young was out at a riot like that. But he said, I'm going to go see if any of these protesters need medical attention. You want to come? And he was with Ryan Bulch, I think is his last name. He's a veteran, and he's a much bigger, more seasoned looking dude, big biceps. He's holding his AR, and Kyle's got his med kit and his AR, and he's walking around and he's saying, medical, does anyone need medical? And I'm walking with my cell phone, and I could see as I'm looking around that everybody who had just been blasted away from the courthouse by the police and tear gassed, and they even had LRADs, these long range acoustic devices that are like loud siren that's irritating. So they're irritated. And this kid's walking around with a rifle and a med kit. And in their minds, they had a completely different view of why he was out there. Like, who does this guy think he is? And so actually there were 4 guys who came out in court that turned out to be from Chicago. Talk about people coming from outside. They yelled at Kyle. They were like, yo, man, you think you're in a movie or something? And again, my job is to get every side of the story. And I'm like, he thinks he's out here for all these good reasons, but these guys, they obviously don't. So I want to get their side of the story. One of the guys had a handgun in his waistband. Another guy had a couple of bricks. Another guy had a sling, like a rock sling, like you would use, literally like an ancient weapon
David
to throw
Goliath,
rocks. Yeah, literally. And the guy with the bricks stepped out on me because I aimed my camera at them and they didn't want to be filmed. And he looked like he wanted to smash my head. And I'm wearing a little plastic helmet that I got from military surplus store. And so I'm like, in my ready position. I had run from multiple attempts at mugging me of my phone. And so I'm ready to run. But I go with my break glass in case of emergency move in these situations. And this is not advisable.
Yeah.
I do not advise handing out alcohol at a riot, okay? This is not medical or journalistic advice. But that was my method, was to get the trust of whoever was out there. At the BLM stuff, I'd bring White Claws and Doobies. White Claw was like spiked seltzer that was popular at the time. And at the Proud Boys stuff, I'd bring Budweisers and cigarettes. But I was like, I had 2 White Claws in my gas mask bag. And so I was like, okay, I'm putting my phone away. I don't want to film you guys. I just want to hear your side of the story. Does anyone want a White Claw? And we'll talk about it. And the dude with the bricks was standing out still menacingly with his bricks right in front of me. And the guy with the handgun was squatted down and he stood up. And he's like, yeah, man, I'll have a White Claw. And I was like, I got 2 left. Let's share one. So let's share them. So I gave him one. I cracked it. I handed it to him. And now they're all laughing. They're like, oh, look at this guy. Look at how scared he is. Like, oh, and look, you think you're tough with your bricks. Like, there's 4 of us and 1 of him. Look at this scared dude. And he cracks the White Claw and we're kind of laughing. And I'm like, so what's the deal? Like, why are you guys mad? And the moment that I said that, Kyle was running down the street with now the AR, the med kit, and a fire extinguisher in his other hand. So he's sprinting down the street with a fire extinguisher and the AR. And I'm like, wherever he's going, there's something going on. So I was like, sorry guys, I got to go. And I didn't even get to crack my White Claw. And so I run down the street after him. And this is now like 2 minutes before the shooting. I call my coworker, Shelby. I'm like, something's about to go down. Where are you? She's like, I'm on Sheridan Road. And I'm like, okay, I'm on the same road. And that's right when I heard screaming. And Joseph Rosenbaum emerged from the side of the street and started chasing Kyle. And so I pulled out I was on the phone and I hung up the phone and I went to my camera app and thought that I started recording video. And I ran behind Rosenbaum, who was behind Rittenhouse, and Rittenhouse was running away. And Rosenbaum threw a bag. I'd never met this guy before, didn't know who he was. He was screaming, threw a bag. I heard shattering. And then they continued into the parking lot of what turned out to be the same owner of the same business, another car business. Mm-hmm. It's called Car Source.
When he threw the bag at someone, or
he threw it in Kyle's direction.
Okay. And
to this day, we don't really. People were saying it's a Molotov cocktail. I didn't see any flames. I just heard a bottle shatter. What came out in court, it was apparently the bag that he had brought straight from a mental hospital. He'd come straight from a mental hospital to the protest, And a gunshot went off right after that bag shattered, and Kyle turned around. And I didn't know that it was a gunshot at the time. I heard a pop. And he's standing with his gun 45 degrees at the ground. And Rosenbaum continued to run, and I'm running behind them. And I actually gained some ground on them. I've been doing some sprinting training over the course of the summer, mostly to run away from muggings. But now I didn't realize, because it happened so quickly, that I was actually sprinting into a dangerous situation. And as Rosenbaum continued to run, Kyle was stationary, and he screamed "F you," and he dove for the rifle, and he missed, and Kyle dodged around and shot 4 rounds in 0.7 seconds. And I told police on the night of, number one, that I had recorded the shooting. And when I went to my camera roll, I realized that I'd taken a photo of the ground. And with horror, I realized I was going to have to tell everybody what I saw rather than just show them. But I also told them that I stepped to the side before the shots went off, thinking in my mind that my own agency had averted the danger. But when I saw the footage afterwards, I realized that actually I stepped to the side like a second after the shooting. So actually my life was in the hands of that 17-year-old with an AR-15 at that time. And I just think I couldn't wrap my head around that. So I had rearranged that minute moment in my head. But what I definitely saw was Rosenbaum screaming and then lunging for the gun and Kyle dodging around. And that was critical in the case. But after he got shot, Kyle ran around the car and Rosenbaum collapsed on the ground. And I told police, I looked down because I felt something go past my legs. And I told police night of, I have the footage from in the interrogation room. I was like, did I just get effing shot? Mm-hmm. Because I felt something go. And actually, as it turns out, I got thrown into this whole court case, and the conservatives were saying he's lying. The bullet didn't go past his legs. It's BS. And then the left was saying, oh, he deleted the footage just to protect Kyle Rittenhouse. And it turns out the FBI was flying a Cessna over the protest, and they had infrared footage that didn't come out until the court case over a year later, but you can see the bullet skip off the ground next to me. So in that moment, yeah, my life, I've had to come to terms with that, like that I could have gotten shot in that moment, and that was my own actions that brought me there. And that also made me both a victim and a witness. And me not knowing Rosenbaum, not knowing anything other than the fact that somebody had just been shot in front of me, I ran over, and I assumed, because it was an AR at such close range, there was like an exit wound somewhere. And my dad was an emergency room doctor. And so I kind of just mimicked what I'd seen my dad do when some kid dove into the sandbar and broke his neck when I was 10 years old. And, he stabilized him, and I did a much worse job than what my dad did, obviously. Not medically trained. My older brother's a doctor, but I'm just a regular customer. But I rolled him over, and there was no exit wound. And it turned out that the bullet had gone straight down his back into the top. There was a small hole in the top of his neck, and then there was a graze wound on his head, and it had gone straight down his back and exploded his lungs and shattered his pelvis. And so when I flipped him over, I didn't see anything. And then somebody said, oh, on his head. That's where the graze wound was. So I stemmed the bleeding there. And then somebody said, there's a hospital right up the street. And I realized this guy was choking on his own blood. We had to get him there. So I went to pick him up, and that's when the other hole was really started bleeding and my hands were slipping. Another guy helped me pick him up. And so I'm trying to stem the bleeding of both these different wounds as we're carrying him across the street. And there's now a chaotic mob surrounding us. And as we get across the street, the hospital's literally right there. There was a medical guy who worked at the hospital. He said, I work at the hospital. I've got a truck. Let's drive down there. It'll be quicker. So it opens the tailgate. There's a Dodge Durango. And I'm loading Rosenbaum into the back, and I feel something. And I didn't realize there was so much adrenaline until this fist just connects with my face. And I turn, and this guy's punching me in the face, like maybe thinking I was involved somehow or something like that. But I couldn't believe that as I'm trying to save this guy's life, that I was getting punched in the face. I gave like my little brother kick, which I had practiced for many years growing up. And I kicked the guy in the chest, and then we sped off and went down into the hospital, and I loaded Rosenbaum onto the gurney. But in those moments going down the hill towards the hospital, I had a moment with Rosenbaum in the car. And this is where my telling of this experience enrages some people on the right because they say Joseph Rosenbaum was a terrible man. He was an evil man and he did evil things. And that's true. But I didn't know that at the time. And secondarily, so what I said to him was, we're going to have a beer after this. It's going to be okay. But all I saw in his eyes was regret. And when my dad passed away in 2017, he had a 5-year battle with cancer. And we spent many of those years going around the world and surfing because he refused to give up. But our whole family was around the bed when my dad passed away. And he heard the nurse leave the room. He hadn't opened his eyes in days. And he opened his eye, the one eye that he could open. And we all huddled around and knew that was the moment. And I saw him go to a place without regret. And he chose that moment to die. And this guy was dying with regret. And if you look at Kenosha, the deeper tragedy there, not the surface level narratives that came out of it. Kyle Rittenhouse's dad, the only knowledge that I have of him being present during all of this ordeal was him leaving drunken messages on Kyle's lawyer's answering machine. Joseph Rosenbaum, the first man killed, he sexually abused minors. But he was, and I'm not excusing what he did, but if you're going to tell the story, you have to go deeper. And the fact of the matter is, when he was 13 years old, he was abused by his stepdad. And the kids that he abused, some of them are in jail for the same crimes. Anthony Huber, the second man shot in the heart, died instantly. He hit Kyle over the head with a skateboard. That skateboard was his only solace in life because his dad had abandoned him. Jacob Blake's father, the guy who was shot by police, who started the whole thing, he had an absent father who only came out of the woodwork when he wanted to sue the government for money. Anthony Huber's dad is now suing the government for money. And Gage Groskowitz, the man who had his bicep shot off, which I saw in the emergency room after I unloaded Rosenbaum onto the gurney. I saw his bicep. It looked like it wasn't even like a movie because it was like almost as if a butcher had just taken that bicep off. It was surreal, but also absent father. And so that whole tragedy was surrounded by broken homes, and me trying to bring that story that I uncovered by experiencing it and also by looking into it after the fact, trying to figure out why it all happened, is thrown into this narrative of he's either a hero or he's a white supremacist. And because Joe Biden implied that he was a white supremacist, well, then we have to call him a hero. But these tragedies are not, you can't just put them in a box. It's not that easy. And so, I know that telling that version of the story is not the thing that's going to get the most clicks or sell the most books, but it's what I experienced. And I think it's important because I think there's a spiritual sickness that pervades across both sides of the political spectrum. And a lot of that, I think perhaps the largest contributing factor are the broken homes. And my parents chose to stay together even if it wasn't easy. And, growing up, I was like, oh, my parents are fighting, but all the divorced kids, they would come to our house to hang out because we had a complete family. And as raucous and absurd as it was, my dad was always giving people stitches on the kitchen table and stuff like that because we were smashing each other up playing shinny hockey or whatever it was that we were doing, airsoft. But, it's after the fact and after the tragedy of losing my dad and the tragedy of Kenosha, you have one of two choices. You either let it bring you down or you use it to make you stronger. And after my dad died, I learned all these things about the sacrifices that he made to ensure that our family, his dad died when he was young and he was cast into the world without stability. And he didn't want that for his family. And that's why he fought so hard at the end. And I learned all these stories after he passed away of the things that he did to pay for med school and to create a stable place for us. And, I think that the entire thing that I've taken away from the whole experience is that the only way that you can make the choice of using it as something to make you stronger rather than as a scar that will drag you down for the rest of your life is if you do look deeper and you do learn why these things happen. And that's just not the media landscape that we live in today. And that's why I had to start my own publishing company, because nobody wanted me to tell that story, because it's not going to, fit neatly into that box.
Yeah, man, that's a story that needs to be told. Systemic problem behind all this in America and our culture is a spiritual one, in my opinion. I mean, America is great because of its founding principles, and I believe that I'm a Christian, and I have a deep belief that the shining light on the hill, does nothing but antagonize Satan, who wants to destroy this country and he has to do it by destroying families and people and breaking it apart. And anytime you look at the brokenness in American culture, or culture around the world, but especially brokenness in American culture, it tends to tie to broken families. And that common thread between all those individuals that are involved it doesn't surprise me. Unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me, and I'm really thankful that you have the willingness to point that out in that deeper thread.
Well, people have to wait for the second book for the love story, but I met my wife in October of 2020 in the midst of all the chaos, and she brought me to church as I was trying to pick up the pieces, during the lead up to the trial and after the trial, and trying to make sense of everything, and starting this book project and quitting my job. And I started going to this church, Graceway Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and it's actually an old Civil War hospital. And I was baptized in 2023. I met my wife, and we've had a kid since then, and I got baptized. And for me, that was the only answer, of a solid foundation, and because nowadays the way that our media functions is like this, with the scrolling. And everybody's not only confronted with people, before you even have your morning coffee, you can see some guy fall off a cliff and some guy get shot, depending on who you follow on Twitter. And not only that, you're also exposed to the lives of all these billionaires and every celebrity, and a look into their lives. Every day you're being bombarded with not just their lives, but the best version of their lives that they're putting forth behind filters and, the way that they're framing it to look as rosy as possible. And so the grass has always been greener on the other side, but now you're confronted with it constantly every day. And I think that is a major contribution. It's like you come from a home where you feel like your parents aren't giving you that. Right. And so everybody's so concerned with what they don't have. And that is one of the driving forces of anger behind our political discourse and behind these protests, is people feel like they're not better off than their parents' generation were, and they're mad about it. And that's part of the reason why I turned towards Christianity. I mean, I asked the pastor, Brad Wells is his name, and I asked him, I like him because he doesn't apologize for the Bible. He just tells me what the Bible says and lets me decide. And that's ultimately what Christianity is. And all the hierarchy of the various churches and sects aside, if you look at the actual Bible, it's about one individual's free will to turn towards God. And I said to him, as I'd been going to church for a year, I said, can I be a Christian if I believe that Jesus is real? I believe he was crucified on the cross. I believe that he performed miracles, but I'm not sure that he rose on the third day. And he just looks at me and goes, no, you can't. You can't be a Christian. And I did all this archaeological research, and I'm reading all these books, and he's like, it's not about that. It's not about the rational part of your brain. That leap is something that is about faith. And when I ultimately decided to get baptized, I took that leap of faith. Yeah. And I actually was alongside a Vietnam veteran. He was baptized on the same day at age 75. And that tells you everything you need to know. It's never too late. Yeah. And so the problem that I have with the way that conservatives dealt with Kenosha, and I'm not saying all conservatives, I'm just saying, just generally speaking, the landscape, was that, nobody asked the question of what kind of stable, well-built family lets their 17-year-olds go out to a riot with an AR-15. But also secondarily, nobody deserves to die like Joseph Rosenbaum did, like what I saw. And the regret that I saw in his eyes was him realizing that he had done terrible things and that he had done evil things, and that he was not going to have the chance to get right with God. And everybody deserves that chance, and nobody deserves to die a dirty patch of concrete like that. And for me, at least the way that I understand Christianity, that's what we need more of in the landscape today, is more grace, rather than saying Trump won and you guys are a bunch of idiots and we're going to, go cry more, lib. It's like, have some grace and let these people come to their own conclusions, because ultimately we're at a point now where I think it's so obvious that the way that things have been going isn't working.
Yeah.
That, I think we need to empower people to think freely rather than try to, ram your point down their throat.
Right. The evidence is there. People come to those conclusions. As you're talking, I was thinking how happy I was when you told me at my book release that you had got married and had a baby, and maybe at the time the baby was on the way, or
no, she was. The most recent book release. Yeah, she was.
And then you had became a Christian, because I was like, plenty of times you were interviewing me for something related to veteran affairs, and I'm always slipping Jesus in there, and I'm like, you're probably like this guy, like, oh.
Yeah. Well, and I had skepticism about the church because I grew up. We went to a non-denominational church, but my mom grew up Catholic, and seeing everything that happened with the Catholic Church, that turned me away from Christianity. And I studied Arabic and I read the Quran in Arabic, and my dad was Buddhist, but at the end of my dad's life, he'd always joke in our hometown, oh, the Catholic Church we go to the Congregational Church because Catholic Church is the ugliest church in town. But they're the only church that had mass every day. And my dad at the end of his life, he went to mass every day. I found out from his caretaker after he passed away, and he was going to church every day. And I didn't want to have to wait for the bad times to turn to that. And I think, everybody can make their own conclusions on, which direction they want to go. This is America. But it was, it gave me the firm ground to stand on to move forward with my life and put that stuff in the rear view and to heal from it. And I think, I thank God that I was able to meet my wife when I did, because I don't know what direction I would have gone without her. So thank you to Pastor Brad and to my wife
and your wife
for taking me out of the chaos.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. One of the things you write in your book is, I think it's a chapter. It's from looting to Rudy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us.
Yeah. So that's in book 2, which is coming out in a couple months.
Okay.
And so that was in October of 2020, and that chapter is called From Looting to Rudy because there was a protest in Philadelphia, and it was in Malcolm X Park, and they were protesting. It was a Black Lives Matter protest. And in these situations, just like in Kenosha, that massive police presence surrounding that protest gives an opportunity. It creates a power vacuum where then people who want to exploit that power vacuum can. And so about 20 minutes away, we got reports that there's a massive looting going on. And so we drive up, and it's me, Shelby, Jorge, and we get out, and they're looting the Walmart. I go in there, the sprinklers are going off. There's an inch of water on the ground. Everything is looted except for the produce section. And so like AOC was saying, like, oh, people they're looting just because they want bread. It's like, no, it was all flat screen TVs. But the other store that was right across the complex, the shopping mall, was a 5 and below. So everything in the store is $5 and below. And they're looting. I mean, that just goes to show like what kind of situation this was. And so we filmed the looting, and Shelby, she goes into the 5 and below. I'm like, because like a dude going in there with a camera, they're going to look at you and like, they're going to punch you in the face. But Shelby, she's like this small, she's very athletic, but she's smaller. So she just kind of goes under the radar. She holds her phone. Like it's, she's got it like on the strap of her backpack. She's like, I'm just, and so she goes in there and films. And another guy, Elijah Schaefer, who was filming the riots, he goes, I'm going in. And I'm like, I'm not going in there. He goes in, and 2 minutes later he comes out, and he's bleeding. He's got punched in the face for filming. And we went across the street. They're looting like a T-Mobile store, and I'm filming it. And these guys are like looking at me filming, and they're like, that's a nice phone. And they come towards me, and I Forrest Gumped out of there. And so the next day we wake up and we're filming all the damage. And I get a text from Christiane Allen, who was Rudy Giuliani's assistant at the time. And I had actually stood up for her in a hit piece in Politico, where they were trying to imply that she lied about being a Daily Caller video contributor, but because she wasn't paid, so that's a lie according to Politico. But I was like, they took I always say with reporters, and for anybody out there who's doing interviews with reporters, you always say, I'm recording this conversation and you have to run the quotes that you're going to use from me past me before you run it to press. Because they always, if they have an agenda, they're going to try to use your quotes and select them out to serve whatever agenda they have. So he tried to use my words to imply that she had lied. And I was like, no, I told her that she could put Daily Caller contributor in her profile. And it's actually on the video. It says Daily Caller contributor in the video that she did for us, because the definition of contributor isn't the cable news definition anymore. You don't have to be paid to contribute. She's contributing content.
Right.
And so because of that, I had a contact with her and I had requested to get the laptop after New York Post got it and they were banned off Twitter. And people forget, like literally they were locked out of Twitter. That's completely censored. 51 intelligence officials came out saying that it was Russian disinformation. And so I got the laptop on October 27th or 28th. She texted me, she said, okay, Rudy can give you the laptop. And so I drove straight from the looting to Rudy's apartment. And
Rudy Giuliani's apartment.
Rudy Giuliani's apartment in New York, which I think he had to sell because of the lawsuit. Really nice apartment, like Midtown, East Side, this old building, beautiful. And I show up and it's two Italian bodyguard security guys, big Italian guys. I'm half Italian, so I can say Goomba. They're Goombas. And then he's got his white-haired lawyer, much littler guy, and then Cristiani, and they're in there. And he says, "Come into the library. I'm going to show you some things." And Rudy's going through his iPad to show me like financial statements of Hunter Biden, but because he's like, I guess, a boomer, and this is not against the boomers out there, but you know, sometimes have a hard time with technology. And he's like swiping through, and it's just like a photo of Hunter's hog.
Yeah,
it is a hog. I mean, I call a spade, and he's trying to swipe away from it, and he's like zooming in on it by mistake. And I'm like, I'm sitting here in Rudy Giuliani's apartment, and there's a photo of the presidential candidate's son's
penis.
and like this, I mean, talk about a surreal moment. And I got the laptop, or there's a copy of the laptop.
I always thought there wasn't anything positive about.
Yeah, I'll tell you what we saw. So I get it, and I get in the car, and I'm in the tunnel leaving Manhattan to drive back to DC to our investigative reporter.
I guess everyone gets one attribute, right?
What's that?
I said everyone gets one attribute.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yes, and I'm a hockey player, so yes, you shower after the games, and it was larger than normal. I'll leave it at that. But
oh my gosh.
So but I didn't know that. Well, I knew that from the iPad, but I didn't know quite how bad it was yet because we hadn't actually opened up the laptop. So I'm driving in the tunnel, and I decided to tweet. Daily Caller is in possession of the Hunter Biden laptop, and I'm bringing it back to our investigative reporter Andrew Kerr for analysis. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I love life. Because like Epstein, it was an Epstein joke.
Yeah.
And my boss, Jeff, who's a former jarhead who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, he calls me up on the phone as I'm driving back from New York, and he's like, "You broke the story that we have the Hunter Biden laptop with an Epstein joke? Are you kidding me?" Like Neil, who's Tucker's roommate in college, who's the CEO at the time, he's like, "He's going to eat your lunch." And I'm like, yeah, it's probably not a good decision. Probably not the best way to break the news. Yeah. Okay, that's a fair point. But I go to Andrew Kerr's house, and we plug it in, and we open it up, and the first thing that we see is just hundreds and hundreds of photos and videos of like Hunter Biden with hookers, and all that stuff is what everyone paid attention to, the salacious stuff. But we also, the smoking gun email of Hunter doing a deal with Burisma and 10% for the big guy, that was what got New York Post censored. And that was what the intelligence officials were claiming was Russian disinformation. And that email, that smoking gun email, we had a forensics expert verify that that was a legitimate email and that it was legitimately sent from Hunter's device and that it wasn't Russian disinformation within 24 hours. And this was before the election. And so the fact that the Silicon Valley oligarchs were able to censor that at the time, days before the election, and create this narrative that it was fake was completely insane. And the way in which the corporate press just played along with it is even more insane, because anybody who's looking at it with clear eyes will know, okay, yeah, let's verify the emails. Let's go through, let's do like journalism. And that's what we did. But it was all censored off the platform, so nobody was able to see it. And the election went the way that it did. But ultimately, to use an Obama quote, he said something like, "History has a tendency to bend in the direction of justice." And so, the best thing that could have happened to Trump was Joe Biden taking office in 2021, because it showed everybody.
I would have never said it at the time, but I couldn't agree with you more right now.
I'm not saying that was good for the country, but I am saying that people were able to see ultimately how ridiculous the entire uniparty had become with their immigration policies. I went to the border in March of 2021, and I watched hundreds and thousands of migrants. I flew up a drone, saw them coming in through the gaps in the wall, and I asked every single one, "Why are you here? Why are you coming here?" And they said, Joe Biden's the president now, and we can come in." And so that was a signal to the rest of the world, come on in. And they came in through the gaps in the wall. And everybody made fun of Trump for saying, "Let's build a wall." I talked to hundreds of Border Patrol agents, and they all say, yeah, a wall would be a tremendous help. If you can't just drive a vehicle straight across the border and then drive it back, yeah, that'd be helpful if you can stop that from happening. And by the way, we have motion detectors that if they're sawing through the wall, we can at least pick up on that. So everyone's like, "Oh, you can just climb over it." I tried climbing over it. It's definitely hard. I think I could do it with straps, but it's not as easy as just driving a vehicle across. Right. And so all of these like plain and simple realities just became so obvious, especially by 2023, when millions of them started showing up in the interior of the country. And like my favorite story of the Joe Biden's entire term was these, Williamsburg is in Brooklyn. It's like more expensive than Manhattan now. They had a park where everybody brought their dogs to take their poops, and it became a migrant shelter. And so this New York Post story was all of these residents complaining about the migrant shelter that was like in their dog park. And they didn't care in 2021 when McAllen, Texas was completely overwhelmed. There's no Border Patrol hospital. All the local hospitals have to deal with that. Local law enforcement has to deal with it. The Border Patrol is totally overwhelmed. All of the facilities that they're using are totally overwhelmed. And, the kids in cages narrative went completely out the window after Trump left office. By the way, Obama built those. Right. And so this whole thing is just like so partisan and so based around never Trumpism that like after 4 years, everyone was just like, wait, oh yeah, the immigration is a problem.
And I think another thing that it was a blessing in disguise is the fact that if Trump would have went 8 years straight, he wouldn't have been ready to do what he's going to do now. Yeah. I mean, he needed that 4 years away to build a team, to have a strategy. And I don't think he realized when he went in the first time how broken it was, how deep.
How many swamp donkeys he was surrounded by.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I say, Bill Barr was, he was the attorney general for Bush. And then and look, I'm not saying anything about, I'm just stating a fact here. His dad was the headmaster of Dalton, which is the most elite school in Manhattan. Sends more kids to Ivy League schools per student than any other school. And he was the headmaster when Jeffrey Epstein was hired without a college degree to be a math teacher there. What kind of person gets hired to be a math teacher at one of the most elite schools in the country without a college degree? And everything that I saw with Bill Barr and the way that he kind of, handled what happened in 2020, it's got Swamp Donkey written all over it.
Yeah. And he's one of many, right? I mean,
yes.
I mean, Trump walked right into, Paul Ryan being the, House Speaker. And so now he's much, much in a better position to actually do what the American people elected him to do.
Yeah. And he's much more aware of the mistakes that were made.
Yeah.
And if you want to get that agenda done, you need people who are willing to do it, despite the fact that, the press, you're going to have to drag the entire DC media and political establishment kicking and screaming as you go.
That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see I remember right at the, when Trump named his nominees, I went to see Steve Bannon speak, and he said, "We're flooding the zone. All these picks are going to go through." And at the time, everybody was saying, "No way that Tulsi gets in. No way that Kash Patel gets in. No way that Pete Hegseth gets in. Or RFK." And they all got through. And so it's definitely a whole different tone coming out of the Trump administration. And the protests in DC have changed a lot too. There've been a lot more than I saw during the beginning of Trump's first term. but also a much older audience, because a lot of these people, much older protest group, because these people are so. Which the good thing is they're peaceful, and there's a lot less abuse of the police officers. But there are a lot of like federal employees and stuff like that who, you know,
they're scared to lose their jobs.
Yeah, they've been working remotely for 3 years. They had a sweet deal. If you offered me 9 months of pay to leave my job, I'd be like, see you later. I could do so. Like, I wish I had to like, I was like bumming Ethereum and stuff like that just to keep the lights on. Like, come on. So, I mean, it's, you know, everybody in the press will like feign, same as after Kenosha, you know, they'll feign all this compassion for the people who are losing their jobs. But also it's like, dude, you're getting paid $10 million a year to sit in a studio and like, give me your crocodile tears. Yeah. It's a totally ridiculous, detached from reality system that we still have in place that's now rapidly changing.
Well, the federal workforce is not a charity. I mean, if you're not producing, like any other business, if you're not producing, look, everybody's. This is my stance on Elon and Doge. If there was a company in America that was failing and going bankrupt, and investors said, "Okay, we're firing their old boss and we're bringing in a new CEO, a new CFO," the first thing that CEO and CFO would do would go line by line, budget item by budget item, and see where there was like fraud, waste, abuse, inefficiencies, and to cut spending in order to get that company turned around and out of bankruptcy so it could survive. That's all Elon Musk is doing. He's a business guy. Trump is a business guy. They're going in and they're looking at the line item budget by budget, and we're wasting money. We have 10,000 employees where we need 5,000. Sorry, like it's not a charity. Like this. Every job they cut from the federal government will create a job in the workforce. They just need to put it dust off their resume.
You having a military background is like, it's about results too.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're not producing results, like that story that was totally blown up and everyone like was like going crazy that Tucker Carlson was making such a stink about the pregnant flight suits for pregnant women. Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, it's a small thing, but it's indicative of a completely ridiculous approach that our military has had for a long time of like, let's like be the virtuous, you know, people who are all inclusive, and, you know, you can get your whatever surgery it is you want, elective surgery. Like if I joined the military and I was like, oh, you know, I don't like my nose. I need a nose. I've broken it 4 times. I need a nose job. Maybe I should join the military and go get a nose job, you know?
Yeah, it's just so much abuse. Look, if you think that it's okay for our taxpayer dollars to pay for transgender comic books in Peru, like I can't even have a conversation.
we just did an interview in Georgetown with this is for Politibrawl, a Substack that I've been writing for, and Matt Miller is the guy who was brave enough to do this, and I was the camera guy, and I'm trying to keep it together from behind the camera, and we're on this street corner in front of PNC Bank in Georgetown, right at Wisconsin and M Street. It's like the nicest part of DC. And he's like, we're taking, can we get your name and your email for, we want, Elon Musk is trying to get rid of all these important DEI programs, like transgender operas in, I think it was, what was it? It was transgender surgeries in Colombia, and transgender opera. I think it was a comic book. Maybe it was a comic book or an opera in Peru. And he's like, yeah, it's millions of dollars. And like most of the people were like, oh yeah, sure. And they're like giving the email. I was like, this is so easy. In like 30 minutes, we raised like $50. And so he's getting their emails. He's like, yeah, we're going to blast you with emails. And I'm like sitting behind the camera laughing. And these two black women were the only ones who were like, oh yeah, I'll support that. And then like, they're like, wait, so what is it? And he's like, oh yeah, it's a transgender surgeries in Colombia, $1 million. And then they're like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah. And they're like, no, that's not real. And he's like, yes, it is. It's real. Mm-hmm. And they're like, we're going to go check it. We're going to the bus. We got to catch the bus, but we're going to check up on that. We're not going to sign this anymore. And so like, that's the thing, is if you actually like put it in front of normal people who aren't like totally indoctrinated, they're like, wait a second.
That doesn't make sense.
How does that help me? Yeah. I'm in America and I'm taking the bus right now.
It's my money. I work hard for. I work hard for. Like, and people work hard in America for their money, and no one likes paying taxes anyway. And if you're going to have to pay it, then we should have a voice where it goes. And And
God forbid.
yeah, yeah, and at least transparency where it goes. I don't want to leave. I want to close the loop on the Hunter Biden laptop. Like,
Yeah.
So all this was hidden. All the stuff you saw. Is it ever going to make it to the public? Is the public ever going to know what was on those?
Well, he got the pardon. So I think that if you look at Kenosha, the truth came out. The media didn't realize what truly happened. And the amount of people after the trial ended who said, I didn't even realize that the people he shot were white and that they weren't black. They didn't realize until the trial because it was just laid out there, not in this echo chamber or that echo chamber, but in a courtroom. And through the adversarial system, people were able to see the truth behind what happened. And Kyle ultimately was acquitted because of the mountain of video evidence and also testimony and just the mere facts of what took place. Look, I didn't write the laws in Wisconsin, but it is what it is. With Hunter Biden, we're never going to get that because he was pardoned. And so, I think in that situation, it's like they're going to let the dead dogs lie. But with respect to that is just the very tip of the iceberg of all of these other completely corrupt operations that were taking place with NGOs. It's like, wait, if it's an NGO, why is it called that stands for non-government organization.
Right.
Why are they funded by the government? That doesn't make any sense. That's not an NGO. That's a GO.
As soon as you take, I could say this, running nonprofits and starting running nonprofits, as soon as you take a government dollar, you are influenced by the same bureaucracy and same limitations of the United States government.
And what happened to the Clinton Foundation?
Yeah, it's in all the money.
I'm still waiting on that. 2015, I went back for Thanksgiving to my friends at home, and I was like going on about Epstein. I'm like, he has an island, and there's this plane called the Lolita Express, and they're like, you're completely crazy. And now, 10 years later, I had my buddy message after the election. He's like, I just want to say, Richie, you were right. And it's like, it does take time, but eventually, we were talking about Kennedy before this. Like, we still don't even know what happened there. And anybody who believes that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter hasn't really looked into it, or they have a different agenda because you know more about guns than I do, but he didn't rip those 6 shots from, allegedly 4. He didn't rip them from, Dealey Plaza with a bolt action rifle in that amount of time.
No, we definitely know him, but he was not the only shooter. And we actually have a project coming up. I'm ready to actually look at it and see and try to, get as accurate of a picture as we can. Look, we were just promised the JFK files. We haven't seen them yet.
Yep.
And the Epstein files. Do you think we'll actually see the Epstein files, by the way?
Well, it's not a question. It's the stuff that, so those binders that came out, that was already, I had already seen that stuff.
There was nothing.
But it's all redacted. So those pages, it's not that, we've already seen the pages. They're completely redacted. So yes, apparently the New York field office has thousands of other files that also should be released, but can't they just unredact them? Like, isn't there, so the stuff that's blacked out, can't you just remove that?
Yeah.
Like,
if
at least some of it, because it's just completely blacked out. You can't see anything. You can see like a name. That's it.
Yeah. So what do you think we're promised by the president. We're promised by the attorney general. We're promised by Cash Patel. I love all these people, by the way. I think they're amazing. But what's stopping them from doing that?
It's millions of people in the bureaucracy who don't want the bodies to be uncovered and don't want, and very, very powerful people. Ghislaine Maxwell's dad was a media magnate who died under mysterious circumstances on his yacht that was named after his daughter. We're talking about like royalty. We're talking about, Bill Gates was hanging out with him.
Yeah.
These are powerful people, and they still have their hands on the reins to a certain extent. So it's like turning a massive ship, and they're just going to drag their feet as much as they can. So
yeah, this wasn't a pedophile ring. This was an extortion ring.
Yes.
by world governments.
It's the same as Hunter Biden. Everybody pays
our own.
attention to the salacious stuff, but there's underlying that a money laundering scheme where all of these government contracts, all of these government operations are being used to, it's similar to what happened in the Catholic Church. It's like they these priests were not just moved around and they didn't just cover it up. They actually rose through the hierarchy precisely because they shared the same dark secrets as the other guys who are high up in the hierarchy. And the only way that in that kind of situation where everybody's rotten, the only way you can trust somebody is if you have dirt on them. And so our first FBI director, Hoover, I mean, he was a collector of blackmail. Yeah. And that's how he stayed in power for so long. And so there's that uglier underbelly of intelligence where blackmail is an incredibly motivating force. But when you spend 40, 50 years using that blackmail to maintain power across all these different, very, very powerful corporations and leaders of these corporations, well, we're now at a point where we're being promised that that's going to be uncovered. But it's like, you know, DC can only do so much, and an FBI director can only do so much.
Here's what I think. With the Epstein thing, I think Jeffrey Epstein was groomed from a young age. He's had connections, and he was selected to manage this project that
maybe by
Mossad and the CIA. Bill Barr's dad, right? Mossad and the CIA built this exploitation project, and they put this island, and they bring, promised men and women, right? That, hey, we're bringing this island. There's beautiful girls there. Your wife's not there. Like, probably nothing about pedophilia, and get maybe some, but whatever their flavor was, right? We're gonna get you out there, and you're gonna have a good time. And then once they get them there, they own them, right? Influencer people, government, and oh, by the way, that girl that you just slept with, by the way, she was 16.
Yes.
And now you own these people for the rest of your life, and now they have, and I believe government agencies do that all the time, by the way, around the world, to exploit people, but extort people.
And everybody looks at American intelligence and Israeli intelligence, but what's always overlooked is British intelligence. And the fact that, the world, the post-colonial world that we are now have become the de facto police of, the borders were drawn by the French and the British, but mostly the British, in the wake of the fall of the Ottoman Empire after World War I and after World War II. All of these borders were drawn not, like for Iraq is the perfect example. The borders were drawn not with the intent of creating a harmonious nation state, but of dividing and conquering. So they cut up the Kurds, they cut up it's 60% Shia, it's 10% Kurdish approximately, and 30% Sunni. And then they take the minority population and they give them the reins, because the majority's gonna be like, no, I want to rule my own country. But the Brits they gave the Sunnis the mandate in Iraq, and this 30% minority was ruling. Saddam Hussein was allegedly secular, Ba'athist, but it's very tribal over there. And that's what I learned when I lived in the Middle East, is everything is tribal over there. And so all the government jobs, the good, stable jobs, they all go to fellow Sunnis. And that happens over the course of 4 decades. And all of a sudden we dismantle the entire Iraqi military, and we're like, okay, yeah, just build a new country. And all the Shias are like, you guys have been stepping on my neck for 40 years. So now it's time to turn the tables. They start killing all the Sunnis in the streets. By the way, they border Iran, our biggest geopolitical adversary, who is Shia. And so we're bringing democracy to the Middle East, to a country that's 60% Shia that borders Iran, that's Shia. That doesn't make sense. But after that happened, then you had ISIS spring up, which is Sunni. And they're saying, okay, in this power vacuum, that's the same as the CHAZ. It's the person who's the most well-armed who's going to rule the day. So like we're now somehow responsible for enforcing the borders that were drawn by the British Empire 80 years ago. And my question is like, why is that our job? And obviously Trump ran on a platform of looking after Americans over overseas wars. So I don't know. We'll see what happens there. So there's a lot going on.
The world is a firestorm right now. This is the Resilient Show, right? Always want to leave a message for the audience to find lessons of resiliency, whether it be mentally, physically, socially, spiritually. What is there any encouragement in the world you've come from to share with the viewers?
I think well, my own story, especially with respect to the protests and riots, is like our greatest disadvantage was also our greatest strength, which was that we were an underfunded small team that was considered to be a trash tabloid by the greater media. And we only had cell phones and small cameras at our disposal. But when the chaos unfolded, all the corporate entities were too big and they weren't as nimble as we were to say, okay, there's a protest, we're going there. They need 6 security guys to go out there with their correspondents, with their big cameras. And so our disadvantage of being underfunded and being young and being inexperienced was our greatest advantage, because we were like, well, there's a massive opportunity here to actually go in there and do what nobody else is doing and just record video and relay it to the public. And I think my experience with everything that happened, the chaos of all the BLM stuff and of January 6th, it's like through that difficulty is actually an opportunity. And with starting my own publishing company, my greatest disadvantage was that I didn't know what I was doing, but that led me to a path of discovery that it wasn't easy, but it was a learning process. And by going the harder road, I was able to do it the way that I wanted. And I think that that's an opportunity that we have not only in media, but just in the landscape in America today is that there's a lot of opportunity for young people to see the way that things were being done in the past and to look at it with fresh eyes and say, hey, here's an opportunity here. And precisely because I'm outside the box is why I can take a different approach. So
yeah,
the pigeon. The pigeon is just the humble bird from the streets.
How can people? I mean, you're a dude worth supporting. I think you're just such awesome dude. It's been a pleasure to get to know you through the years, and I'm super proud of this. Like, get the book and everything you have going for you. How can people support you?
So you can go to pigeonpress.com. Mm-hmm. You can support your local bookstore and get it at your bookstore. But
okay,
here's the reality of the matter. We do live in the world that we live in today. The Bezos Boutique, Amazon.com, is the best place to get it. And Pigeon Press will take you there. You can also go to your local bookstore. But
Bezos Boutique.
You got to rub that bald head. Give the Amazon review only if you like it. Don't give a review if you don't like it. But and I think that's indicative of we still have to rely on the social media platforms that we do, and it is what it is. But the fact of the matter is, here you are saying what you really think, and I said what I really think, and so I think there is a tremendously new opportunity for people to use the technology that we have at hand to actually change the way that the conversation is happening. Yeah. And so Amazon.com and at Richie McGinniss, no spaces.
And the new one's coming out
in a couple months. I got the Jarhead is editing it. He's a busy man.
Okay.
He's Anthony Swafford is editing it right now, and that one it's a whole different kind of trip. But this covers the BLM, and there's plenty to dig in here. And so by the time you get done with this, the next one will be ready.
All right, perfect. Well, as you know, we have some amazing sponsors that take care of the show here. We have Smith & Wesson Firearms, Vortex Optics, Gators Eyewear. You're drinking some holy water, BioPro supplements, and Ally Wealth. All make this show possible. So we have some gifts for you. I fully intended to take you out shooting, but I had eye surgery, and I don't usually listen to doctors too well. Both with my eyes, I can't play around. I only have 2 of them.
That's all right.
So,
we can do it another time.
We'll have to do it another time. But one of the things we're gonna give you is Smith & Wesson firearm. This is my Equalizer pistol. It's clear for those internet trolls that always have something to say. So it's clear, and that is a Smith & Wesson Equalizer. That's what I carry. I know. We're gonna give you an option to choose what you want.
It's a red dot sight?
It's a red dot. That's a Vortex. That's the Vortex Defender CCW. And
and by the way, in the Kenosha trial, I had better trigger discipline with my air rifle than you remember Binger. He put his finger on the AR-15. He put his finger on the trigger. So there you go for all you folks out there. Wow, beautiful. Thank you.
And we're gonna get you the first one. You're the first one that's gonna get the resilient. Everybody's been asking for Resilient Show hats. So you're the first one that's actually getting. I've never given one yet. I have one, and now you have the second one. And I picked
There we go.
wanted to pick a color that I thought fit you, and I picked that color.
Matches my shirt.
And then I
perfectly.
walked in and you were in this shirt, so it's so perfect.
Yeah.
Hey, so we're going to kind of tease this out. We have an opportunity in the new administration for podcasts to actually be part of the White House press briefings, the White House correspondents, and get it in actually not just the legacy media companies like Fox or CNN. And so our friend Richie lives in D.C., has been in this space, and so we're going to be working towards partnering with Richie to be our voice out in D.C. and our eyes and ears at the White House, and be able to get that information daily from the White House and the briefing room to you guys. And so we're working on that.
Maybe some protests too.
Yeah, maybe some protests.
We'll be out both on the ground and in the halls of democracy.
Yeah. Hopefully not in the halls of the Capitol.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be there. Yeah. No. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the episode with Richie. Definitely get a copy of his book. If you have not done so yet, like, comment, subscribe, and share with someone. Share this episode with someone. And if you're not on Patreon yet, it's an awesome way to support the show, to keep the show alive, and amazing behind the scenes comment. We got some extra stories we're sharing on Patreon about from Richie about what he saw on that laptop besides Hunter's extra stuff. So we had some good stuff there, and you'll find tons of tools and resources to live resilient. So sign up on Patreon. Love you guys. Thank you. Until next week, stay resilient. Hey, what's up, Resilient family? I am so grateful for each of you who tune in every week to hear our episodes. We have such incredible guests and topics that I am passionate about, our team's passionate about, and we could not do it without you. So we're thankful for you. We love you. We appreciate you locking arms with us to be more informed, to become a more resilient community. And I want to invite you to become a tighter part of that community by joining us on Patreon. If you go to our show notes below, you can click the link and get dialed into our Patreon and get extra content weekly. You can join for $15 a month and get behind the scenes footage, get closer access to me. I have monthly Zooms that I'll be doing with some members of the community. And so we'd love to get more involved. Again, go below in the show notes and click the link and join today.